today I'm talking to Ellie Osborne, who is Head of Social Intelligence at Join the Dots, and Andy Buckley, who is Head of Client Solutions. And we are looking at what is social intelligence. So firstly, I just had a quick question about what's the difference between social listening and social intelligence?
Okay, that's a really great question, because both have been bandied around quite a lot. And I think there's two distinct differences that I think of. So I think of social listening as being almost a kind of fieldwork element to what we do. So whereas before you may have used CATI to collect data, or you're maybe using an online survey to collect data, I see social listening as being the means of collecting the data. So if you're not totally familiar with social listening and what it involves, just a really quick recap. So there's various different platforms out there that we use, and basically you almost create a Google search. So you put in keywords connected to your objectives or what you want to find out more about, and then the platform will draw in all the open source conversations that are happening mentioning those keywords. So that may be people having conversations on Twitter, people having conversations in digital forums, people having conversations in blog posts, etc. It does exclude Facebook. At one point we could get Facebook topic data, but those days are long gone, and we get some but quite limited Instagram data as well. But basically it's the mechanics, the listening part of drawing in all that data. And actually why we refer to social intelligence at Join the Dots is because what we do goes beyond so much more than just collecting those conversations and listening. So with a social intelligence platform, you'll get a lot of metrics around mentions, the number of times a word's been mentioned or a brand's been mentioned, the volume of conversations that are happening, which is just one dimension. What we do is apply qualitative analysis techniques to the raw data and start to understand it more and understand those conversations. We'll also draw in search data, so what people have searched for on Google in connection with this topic, to understand what are some of the information needs alongside what are the things that people are talking about. And at times we'll also draw in some passive data approaches as well. So that might be where we'll observe a particular audience with their permissions on social for a certain period of time, or they may have downloaded an app and we can see their digital behaviours alongside this. So yeah, I think this kind of takes that listening part, which feels very passive, metric, gives you a metric at the end, this is how many people have mentioned you, and it kind of takes it to that next level, which is why we tend to refer to it as social intelligence rather than social listening.
Now, I know the journey for Join the Dots with social intelligence it's been in the running for quite a few years now. So I just wanted to understand how that's all come about and how we've ended up using social intelligence at Join the Dots.
Yeah, well, probably I can introduce it, because I remember from I was the Director of Innovation at Join the Dots in about 2012, and as a digital first agency back, right from our heritage, we would always be looking to find the next better, faster, cheaper source of doing insight for clients, and typically that meant we always went on a digital first platform. So it naturally made sense that we always kind of kept an eye out for what was happening in the world of social listening and using social media really to help inform our clients. And it's interesting that it was around about 2006 that we first got into online communities, and it seemed to make a lot of sense to us as social listening evolved in sort of like 2010, that we were getting a source of primary research from our clients that was always on. It was like an always on digital format that we could go and do market research with people that were in this community. And we always felt that we were missing maybe that side of, well, what happens when people don't talk in our community? What happens when it's on the outside world, when a researcher isn't asking any questions? And that's the world of social media. So we always had an eye to it, but we couldn't quite bring it into the organisation. And I think the biggest challenge for us was that we always found that clients said, well, I've already got one of those. I've already got a marketing team or a social media team that's interacting with consumers online about their experiences, or I'm tracking the brand and it's not owned by Insight, it's owned by marketing. So we just couldn't find the way to plug it in, and it was about 4 years ago that I first met Ellie, and Ellie effectively gave me that great answer that she just gave before, which is, well, why actually is social intelligence of value to market research? And it's not just about tracking a brand, and it's not just tracking about what people are talking about. You can use it effectively as a source of insight.
Great. And what are the benefits of social intelligence? Why should market researchers be employing them a little bit more?
I mean, I think for me, response rates are still challenging, and I know there's some great work being done out there to engage people with continuous communities and to bring people on board with online surveys. But I think if we're all honest, response rates have become more challenging over the last few years. And I just think, well, all people are having these conversations out there already sometimes. Why not tap into the in the moment organic conversations that people are having, rather than going out there trying to ask lots of people and get them to remember the 3 months ago when they drank that particular can of drink. I think for me that's the biggest thing. And how I got into all this, I've worked as a researcher for about 16 years now, was I was at a conference with a client, and we'd just done a qualitative project where the recruitment was horrendous. And if you're a quality, I'm sure you've all had those projects where the recruitment hasn't quite gone to plan. Sat and listened to a conference paper where they were talking about the benefits of SI, and particularly the fact that you don't have to go out and recruit people all the time. And we both sat there, and I said, do you know what? I wonder if people are talking about what we did our project on. And she was like, let's have a look. And then we both just sat there, and she was like, we should have done this for this project. And I was like, yeah, we should have. And I think for me, that just spiraled the whole journey into SI. I was really interested in how people talked about brands online, how brands could learn from these conversations and behaviours, how people interacted, if they chose to follow a brand or if they didn't, and why, and what that might be. And I think, it kind of all spiraled for me. But really, I think the core benefits are the data's already there. In some cases, some projects you might not, but most of the time it is. And it's in the moment. It's people using their own language and talking about things that are important to them as and when they happen, rather than us as researchers having to shape, or get them to remember something, etc. So, yeah.
So why then, you've just listed so many different benefits. Why are agencies quite slow, or have been slow in the past, to take on this new methodology?
Well, I think, going from my experience from it was if you've got a market research agency that's running with client relationships, and it's got a business to run, and it's got its annual targets to hit, it's really hard to fit in a new technique which can potentially completely disrupt the status quo in terms of how you're delivering to that client, what that client needs, and how that even the client as well has got a level of inertia as to what they've got to deliver for their internal stakeholders. So to present something that really does turn the industry on its head, much in the same way that when we were doing, back in the day when I was doing telephone interviews and face-to-face, and then we moved to the switch to online, I think it's going to be a similar education process where clients need to get that confidence, and there'll be the validation there, but also that space to think and see that there is value from the case studies that we do, that eventually it'll become just like online research became the fully accepted technique. I think social intelligence has got that potential to disrupt the primary research industry in the same way that online disrupted face-to-face and telephone research.
Yeah, and it's interesting because being on a similar journey, and back in the day using Catty, the arguments or the questions that get put to me most frequently around social intelligence are the same questions that I used to get asked about doing online surveys. Representativeness every time. Is it representative? My argument always is you have to accept that it's not you're not going to be able to get like a nat rep sample from SI, and sometimes you don't even know the demographics of the people that are talking about something, which can be a challenge. But equally, you get a certain type of person who's going to go to a focus group. You get a certain type of person who's going to take part in an online survey. I think whatever methodology we have, we always have to question, is it truly represented? I don't know. I would question that a lot of the time it isn't. So I think we have to accept that sometimes, there are issues with representativeness in terms of it's a certain type of person that's going to talk about this online, and it's a certain type of person that's going to do a survey, etc. As I said, but yeah, I think that journey of the evolution of research approaches is, as Andy said, we're going through a similar cycle now, and it's just it's kind of like history repeated itself a little bit.
But I think the other aspect that where market research has been evolving, and it was in our brand name as Join the Dots, obviously now with Insights Consulting, is that the idea was that you weren't increasingly going to use one single methodology, one single touch point with a consumer to understand the range of insight needs that would fulfill a client brief. And that's very much where our thinking came from. And I think that'll be potentially one of the ways that social intelligence is going to really find its feet and add value, is when you combine it with primary, or you validate it with primary, or you combine it with culture and trends, for example, to then triangulate. And it's just different sources of data that are going to be working together to give client a bigger picture.
So I guess the final question is, where is this all going? What's the future of social intelligence?
Well, I partly answered it in that last one, I think. But yeah, I think I can only see it growing. I think one of the biggest problems that we find with clients is, it's been interesting. The market research industry has been investing a lot in technology and tools. And whilst that's not an easy thing to do, I think it's easier than tackling maybe the even bigger problem with market research, which is access. And you've been alluding to it, Ellie, which is access to people. And getting hold of the right people to get those insights is one of the challenge. And I think for that reason, because there is so much information and such a breadth of the population that are out there on social media, tapping into that as a source can only increase its usage over time. And I wouldn't be surprised if we'll begin to find that, because we've only ever had sort of primary research as an option for us as a market research agency, it would be easy to think that that's the only way of tackling most client briefs. But I think we'll increasingly start to find our confidence that actually you can either augment primary research or replace primary with a social intelligence piece, because the speed at which clients work at very much is now fitting the speed at which social intelligence work can be done in relation to primary.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, I am slightly biased, but I think it's going to grow. And actually, I've seen over the last couple of years already it growing massively. I think I mentioned that I went to a conference, and that's when I heard someone talking. It inspired me to look into this more. Back then, I think 6-7 years ago, it was quite unusual to hear people talking about using social data and social listening techniques on the conference circuit. But now I would say pretty much every conference I go to, there is someone talking about it there. And I think for me, that's just a sign of how much it's grown, and the confidence is growing in it as well. So yeah, I agree. I think it's got loads of potential. I think it's only going to grow and grow.
Well, thank you very much, both of you. That was really useful. Thank you for listening, and I hope that gave you a good introduction into what social intelligence is.